Welcome back to the reading of The Magician's Nephew, which is the first in the Chronicles of Narnia series, and we are on chapter 14 today. So, let me just find it. Chapter 14, The Planting of the Tree. "Well done," said Aslan, in a voice that made the earth shake. Then Diggory knew that all the Narnians had heard those words, and that the story of them would be handed down from father to son in that new world for hundreds of years, and perhaps forever. But he was in no danger of feeling conceited, for he didn't think about it at all now that he was face to face with Aslan. At this time, he found he could look straight into the lion's eyes. He had forgotten his troubles and felt absolutely content. "Well done, son of Adam," said the lion again. "For this fruit you have hungered and thirsted and wept. No hand but yours shall sow the seed of the tree that is to be the protection of Narnia. Throw the apple towards the riverbank where the ground is soft." Diggory did as he was told. Everyone had grown so quiet that you could hear the soft thump where it fell into the mud. "It is well thrown," said Aslan. "Let us now proceed to the coronation of King Frank of Narnia and Helen, his queen." The children now noticed these two for the first time. They were dressed in strange and beautiful clothes. From their shoulders rich robes flowed out behind them, to where 4 dwarfs held up the king's train, and 4 river nymphs the queen's. Their heads were bare, but Helen had let her hair down, and it made a great improvement in her appearance. But it was neither hair nor clothes that made them look so different from their old selves. Their faces had a new expression, especially the king's. All the sharpness and cunning and quarrelsomeness which he had picked up as a London cabby seems to have been washed away. And the courage and kindness that he had always had was much easier to see. Perhaps it was the air of the young world that had done it, or talking with Aslan, or both. "Upon my word," whispered Fledge to Polly, "my old master's been changed nearly as much as I have. Why, he's a real master now." "Yes, but don't buzz in my ear like that," said Polly. "It tickles so." "Now," said Aslan, "some of you undo that tangle you have made with the trees, and let's see what we shall find there." Diggory now saw that where 4 trees grew together, their branches had all been laced together or tied together with switches to make some sort of a cage. The 2 elephants with their trunk and a few dwarfs with their axes soon got it all undone. There were 3 things inside. One of them was a young tree that seemed to be made of gold. The second, that seemed to be made of silver. And the third was a miserable object in muddy clothes sitting hunched up between them. "Gosh," whispered Diggory, "Uncle Andrew!" To explain this all, we must go back a bit. The beast, you remember, had tried planting and watering him. When the watering brought him to his senses, he found himself soaking wet and buried up to his thighs in earth, which was quickly turning to mud, and more animals around him than he had ever dreamed of in his life before. It was perhaps not surprising that he began to scream and howl. This was in a way a good thing, for it persuaded everyone, even the warthog, that he was alive. So they dug him up again, and as soon as his legs were free, he tried to bolt. But one swift curl of the elephant's trunk round his waist put an end to that. Everyone thought he must be kept safely somewhere till Aslan had time to come and see him and say what should be done about him. So they made some sort of cage or coop all around him, and then they offered him everything they could think of to eat. The donkey collected great piles of thistles and threw them in, but Uncle Andrew didn't seem to care about them. The squirrels bombarded him with volleys of nuts, but he only covered his heads and hands and tried to keep out the way. Several birds flew to and fro, diligently dropping worms on him. The bear was especially kind. During the afternoon, he found a bee's nest, and instead of eating it himself, which he very much would have liked to have done, this whirly creature brought it back to Uncle Andrew. But this was in fact the worst failure of it all. The bear lobbed the whole sticky mess over the top of the enclosure, and unfortunately it hit Uncle Andrew slap bang in the face. The bear, who wouldn't have minded being hit in the face by Honeycomb himself, could not understand why Uncle Andrew staggered back, slipped up and sat down. Anyway, it was sheer bad luck that he sat down on the pile of thistles. And anyway, as the warthog said, quite a lot of honey got into the creature's mouth, and that's bound to have done some good. They were really getting quite fond of their strange pet, and hoped that Aslan would allow them to keep it. The cleverer ones were quite sure that now some of the noises that came out of his mouth had meaning. They christened him Brandy, because he made that noise so often. In the end, however, they all had to leave him there for the night. Aslan was busy all that day instructing the new king and queen, doing other important things that they couldn't attend to. Poor old Brandy. What with the nuts and pears and apples and bananas that had been thrown in, he did fairly well for supper. But it wouldn't be true to say that he passed an agreeable night. "Bring out that little creature," said Aslan. One of the elephants lifted Uncle Andrew in his trunk and laid him at the lion's feet. He was too frightened to move. "Please, Aslan," said Polly, "could you say something to unfrighten him, and then could you say something to prevent him from coming back here again?" "Well, do you think he wants to?" said Aslan. "Well, Aslan," said Polly, "he might send someone else. He's excited about the bar off the lamppost growing into a lamppost tree, he thinks." "He thinks a great folly, child," said Aslan. "This world is bursting with life for these few days because of the song which I called it into. Life still hangs in the air and rumbles in the ground. But it will not be so for long. But I cannot tell that to this old sinner, and I cannot comfort him either. He has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would only hear growlings and roarings. Oh, Adam's son, how cleverly you defend yourself against all that might do you good. But I will give to him the only gift that he is still able to receive." He bowed his head rather sadly and breathed into the magician's terrified face. "Sleep," he said. "Sleep and be separated for a few hours from all the torments you have devised for yourself." Uncle Andrew rolled over immediately with closed eyes and began to breathe peacefully. "Carry him aside and lay him down," said Aslan. "Now, dwarfs, show your smithcraft. Let me see you make 2 crowns for your king and queen." More dwarfs than you could dream of rushed towards the golden tree. They had all its leaves stripped off and some of its branches too, before you could say Jack Robinson. And now the children could see that it didn't merely look gold, but it was a real, soft gold. And it of course had sprung up from the half-sovereigns that had fallen out of Uncle Andrew's pocket when he was turned upside down, just as the silver had grown up from the half-crowns. From nowhere, it seemed, piles of dry brushwood for fuel, little anvil, hammers, tongs, and bellows were produced. Next, the fire was blazing, the bellows were roaring, and the gold was melting. Hammers were clinking. 2 moles whom Aslan had sent to dig earlier in the day poured out piles of precious stones at the dwarf's feet. Under the clever fingers of the dwarf, the 2 little crowns took shape, like modern European crowns, but light, delicate, beautifully shaped circles you could really wear and look nicer by wearing. The king was set with rubies and the queen with emeralds. And when the crowns had been cooled in the river, Aslan made Frank and Helen kneel before him, and he placed the crowns upon their heads. Then he said, "Rise up, King and Queen of Narnia, father and mother of many kings that shall be in Narnia, and the Isles and Archerland. Be just and merciful and brave. This blessing is upon you." Then everyone cheered, or bayed, or neighed, or trumpeted, or clapped its wings, and the royal pair stood looking solemn and a little shy, but all the nobler for their shyness. And while Diggory was still cheering, he heard the deep voice of Aslan behind him saying, "Look!" Everyone in that crowd turned its head, and everyone drew a long breath of wonder and delight. A little way off, towering over their heads, they saw a tree that had certainly not been there before. It must have grown up silently, yet swiftly, as a flag raises when you pull it on a flagstaff, and when they're all bruised about the coronation, its spreading branches seemed to cast a light rather than a shade, and a silver apple peeped out like stars from every leaf. But it was the smell that came from it, more than the sight, that made everyone draw a breath. For a moment, everyone could hardly think about anything else. "Son of Adam," said Aslan, "you have sown well, and you Narnians, let it be your first care to guard this tree, for it is your shield. The witch of whom I told you about has fled far away into the north of the world. She will live on there, growing stronger in dark magic. But while that tree flourishes, she will not come down into Narnia. She dare not come within 100 miles of the tree, for its smell, which is joy and life and health to you, is death and horror and despair to her." Everyone was suddenly staring solemnly at the tree, when Aslan suddenly swung round his head, scattering golden gleams of light from his mane as he did so, and fixed his large eyes on the children. "What is it, children?" he said, for he caught them in the very act of whispering and nudging one another. Oh, Aslan, sir," said Diggory, turning red. "I forgot to tell you. The witch has already eaten one of those apples, one from the same kind of tree, same kind that tree grew from." He hadn't really said all he was thinking, but Polly at once said it for him. Diggory was always much more afraid than she was of looking a fool. "So we thought, Aslan, that there must be some mistake. She can't really mind the smell of those apples." "Why do you think that, daughter of Eve?" asked the lion. "Well, she ate one." "Child," he replied, "that is why the rest are now a horror to her. That's what happens to those who pluck and eat fruits at the wrong time and in the wrong way. The fruit is good, but they loathe it after." "Oh, I see," said Polly. "And I suppose because she took it in the wrong way, it won't work for her. I suppose it won't make her young and all that." "Alas," said Aslan, shaking his head, "it will. Things always work according to their nature. She has won her heart's desire. She has unwearying strength and endless days like a goddess. But length of days with an evil heart is only length of misery, and already she begins to know it. All get what they want, but they do not always like it." "I nearly ate one myself, Aslan," said Diggory. Would I?" "You would, child, for the fruit always works. It must work. But it does not work happily for anyone who pluck it at their own will. If any Narnian, unbidden, had stolen an apple and planted it here to protect Narnia, it would have protected Narnia, but it would have been done so by making Narnia into another strong and cruel empire like Shan. Not the kindly land I mean it to be. And the witch tempted you to do another thing, my son, did she not?" "Yes, Aslan. She wanted me to take an apple home to my mother. Understand, then, that it would have healed her, but not to your joy or hers. The day would have come when both you and her would have looked back and said it would have been better for her to die in her illness." And Diggory could say nothing, for tears choked him, and he gave up all hope of saving Mother's life. But at the same time, he knew that the lion knew what would have happened, that there might have been some terrible things even more than losing someone by death. But now, Aslan was speaking again, almost in a whisper. "That is what would have happened, child, with a stolen apple. But it is not what will happen now. What I will give you now will bring joy. It will not, in her world, give endless life, but it will heal. Go, pluck her an apple from this tree. For a second, Diggory could hardly understand. It was as if the whole world had turned inside out and upside down, and then someone, in a dream. He was walking across to the tree, and the king and queen were cheering him, and all the creatures were cheering too, and he plucked an apple and put it in his pocket. Then he came back to Aslan. "Please," he said, "may we go home now?" He had forgotten to say thank you, but Aslan understood. And that's the end of this chapter. I think there's one more chapter left and then we're done with this book. So tune in tomorrow for that.